Jobs, 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 work, 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 jobs, 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 work, 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 self-worth, self-worth, money, 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 money. My grandma on my dad's side, Isabella, worked as an economist in the Soviet Union. A communist economist, which is fun to say. Communist, economist. She worked with big computers the size of a building that ran on punch cards. Her job was to come up with difficult questions about economics, and then a technician would translate that question into a math equation, and the mega-sized computational structure would find a solution to that equation. Her specialization was in the economics of transportation, the movement of people and goods in the industrial zone of Donetsk. Rest in peace. Her husband, my grandfather, Anatoly, was an engineer and an inventor. He had over 30 patents to his name. His area of research was the mechanics of coal machinery and how to build machines that don't emit sparks so as to not explode deep in the coal mines beneath Donetsk. Rest in peace. Their next jobs were as janitors. Canada had no use for communist economists or Russian inventors, so they became floor sweepers and garbage bin emptiers. When they arrived, there was a 12.4% unemployment rate in the province of Alberta, so they were anxious about finding work as two nearly 60-year-olds who didn't speak a lick of English. But a kind man by the name of Roman suggested they go to a central plaza in downtown and go office to office, offering their services as a janitorial duo. And it worked. My grandma says she learned to smile big and friendly like a Canadian. And along with that, my grandma says she learned to smile big and friendly like a Canadian. And along with a couple of English phrases, that landed them a few offices that they'd clean in the evenings. Then her famous smile landed them an even better gig, cleaning a street shelter named the Bissell Center. They tidied up after addicts, sex workers, and counted as most vulnerable. She says sometimes their boss would give them extra food donations if there were too many to be used at the shelter. Cans of tuna and spam, sardines and tomato and sardines and oil, corned beef and chicken, Vienna sausages. I remember seeing these cans in their pantry as a kid. I thought they must have really been through some shit to hoard that many cans. My mom worked in medicine all her life. The first year she didn't get into Soviet med school because they'd already met their Jew quota, plus she didn't bribe the right officials at the exam, so she got a job at the hospital as a sanitation worker in the gastroenterology ward to build some experience. But the folks at the hospital recognized her potential and gave her a bunch of nursing duties, which, to be fair, she was not qualified for. It was her job to write sick notes so people could show to their employers. It was her job to retrieve and deliver the rubbing alcohol, as she was the only employee trusted not to drink or sell any. It was also her job to accompany failed suicide attempts by poisoning to the psychiatric hospital across town, where they would go undergo assessments. It was also her job to accompany failed suicide attempts by poisoning to the psychiatric hospital across town, where they would undergo assessment after getting their guts pumped in the regular hospital. She says she felt it was her job to listen and talk with these mostly young women on the long drives across Donetsk. Rest in peace. She's a good listener. So she went to med school and finished most of it, but then circumstances forced her to come to Canada and give birth to me, so her doctor's dreams were never realized, but she was able to apply her Soviet med school credits towards a nursing certificate, which led to her next job in the palliative ward for HIV patients in 1993. She says those sick people were kept under lock and key behind closed doors in an atmosphere of fear and ignorance. She changed dressings on their lesions and listened to their stories. Her next job was as a nurse at a care home for adults with cognitive disabilities. She says they all ate dinner together at one long table every day. Parallel to that, she worked at the hospital in the gynecology ward for medically necessary abortions and miscarriages. She says no one wanted her to work there because of the stress of the job, but she took it on. There were only 6 beds in that ward, and she said that the stories of the women who occupied those beds remained painfully vivid in her mind. Then that ward was closed and she transferred to work in neurosurgery, then cardiology, then long-term care and rehabilitation, then peritoneal dialysis, then day surgery. My dad's first job was as an assistant loader at the macaroni factory at age 14. He says his boss, the head macaroni loader, Tolya, tried to teach him to drink port, but he never took to the subject. Then he was an apple picker in Moldova. After that, he got a job at an auto mechanic shop in Moscow for him and his 5 friends because his second cousin was in charge of hiring there. His next job was as an opening act for movies in the cinema. He says historically this opening act was usually propaganda or socialist agitation, but by the late 80s, Perestroika had loosened things up and instead they hired my dad to sing songs before movies. It was a pretty lucrative gig. After that, he got his first Canadian job as a laborer at a metal junkyard, then as a server at a few different restaurants, polishing up his English language skills along the way. Tony Roma's a golf clubhouse, Cafe Budapest, the Saganaki Greek Taverna were all stops on this journey. Then he got a job at the SPCA, walking dogs, driving deliveries, cleaning up, whatever needed to be done. He even did outcalls extracting skunks from basic placements and the like, he was also very fond of the university higher student office, where he picked up many temporary gigs, gardening, painting, even assembling line work on the door factory. The job of his that I remember most fondly was next. He drove the train at the Saskatoon Zoo. Then he got a job at his veterinary faculty in the pathology lab. His duties included diluting 50 liters of formaldehyde daily and assisting on autopsies. For a while, every single person we knew got an animal skull for their birthdays. Cows, horses, sheep, dogs, happy birthday to you. His next job was as a veterinarian in family practice, then in emergency medicine, and then finally an endoscopy, removing various objects the dogs and cats eat from inside their stomachs. Diamond rings, fish hooks, teddy bears, underwear, you name it. My brother Daniel's first gainful employment was as an 8-year-old doing Russian voiceover work for a kid's cartoon. He says he just had to say random words into a microphone, and in exchange he got money. Sounds about right to me. His first real job was as a deli attendant at Eurofoods Tri-City, a small grocery serving the Russian community in the suburbs of Burnaby, Port Moody, and Coquitlam. Then he worked as a busser at the failing Italian restaurant Anducci's, but when the checks started bouncing, he moved over to unloading trucks at Zeller's, 7 a.m. to noon daily, followed by a power nap, and off you go. After that, he worked coiling school planners for 8 hours. He worked coiling school planners for 8 hours a day, standing upright and proud on a cement assembly line floor. He was laid off for not maintaining an appropriate pace of work. Next, he worked for RGIS Inventory, conducting external inventory counts for stores. This was his least favorite job of all time, he says. This motivated him to return to restaurants, starting with hosting at Milestones in downtown Vancouver, then the incredibly busy Stefo Souvlaki Greek Taverna, where he bussed, hosted, bartended, and finally waited tables. A line down the block for every weekend shift was the norm, and it was his task to cut off the line at closing time. Heartless destroyer of garlicky, cheesy dinner plans that he was. Then, he served at the low-key Caribbean spot The Reef and fine dining mainstay Chambar concurrently. After that, he worked as the regional director of the Canadian Improv Games High School Tournament for the region of Toronto. From Ajax to Barrie to Milton, he drove around delivering workshops to teams of bright-eyed high school improvisers. Upon completing university, he got a sales job at an education technology company in Montreal. He was very startup-y, he says. It was very startup-y, he says. Beer on tap at the office, a synthetic putting green, shuffleboard, poor work-life balance, young man machismo, toxic expectations of deceit in pursuit of sales, etc. After quitting that job, he worked on a federal elections campaign, knocking on doors and building communication strategies. His candidate lost the election by a tiny margin, but Daniel got a taste for the thrill of politics. Then he worked as an attendant at a temporary shelter that's set up in the early days of the COVID shutdown to accommodate social distancing for street folks. It was his first experience injecting some with Narcan to stop an overdose. When the temporary shelter was closed, he'd return to food service for want of directly and simply bringing positivity into someone's life through food. Pandemic notwithstanding, after that he worked another political campaign for the NDP, this time a provincial one, for a winning candidate. Then back to serving, then a part-time communication contract for the MLA whose campaign he'd worked on, which turned out to be less thrilling than the all-consuming energy of an election campaign, and now he's working on opening a pasta counter service place. What about me? Job, work, job, self-worth, money.